Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The Pardons Board has reduced the jail time of former Prime Minister Datuk Sri Najib Razak from 12 years to 6. Now, this means Najib could be released from prison August 2028. This is not taking into account early release for good behaviour. The Pardons Board has also reduced his fine from 210 million ringgit to 50 million ringgit. Now, what implications might this have on the Madani government? Joining me now is political scientist Professor Wong Chin Huat. He is Deputy Head of Strategy for the Asia headquarters of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network at Sunway University. Chin Huat, thank you for joining me on the show. Now that we've had this announcement after several days of being on tenterhooks, what is your reaction? How are you digesting this announcement from the Pardons Board?
I think, like many members of the Malaysian public, I care about transparency and accountability in this case. What we are looking at is not the discretionary power of the Yang Dipertuan Agong, but what are the role played by state officials and other members, appointed members of the Pardon Board. So Project Stability and Accountability for Malaysia, Project SAMA in short, of which I am a member, has called for full disclosure of the grounds grounds of representation made by corruption convict Najib Razak, as well as grounds for consideration or recommendations made by other members of the Pardon Board, especially any written opinion by the Attorney General.
All right. What are your concerns, Chin Huat, if these grounds are not made public, not made transparent?
Pardon is a very important process in our justice system. It supplements justice with compassion. The idea is for a convict to be made a new man or a new woman so that they can have a second chance. That's very important. And that is why that is not permitted for judicial review. However, when we do not have any details of that, the public would lose confidence in the entire process, thinking that if you are powerful,
you can commit crimes without consequences. And in this is particularly important because corruption convict Najib
Razak has 3 other cases ongoing. So if he really wants to have a pardon, what he should do is to plead guilty in all these 3 cases in exchange for leniency and then seek pardon in one go. So what it means then that he wants to be a new man. Now, if that's the case, that is more acceptable. Because all over the world, we know that political elites who get convicted, often they get pardoned for the sake of either humanitarian grounds or for political reconciliation. But for that to happen, it's very important for them to show remorse, to show redemption. And so in this case, we do not know what have Najib done on the day of pardon and on the day he was convicted. If nothing happened in between here, if he still insisted that he is a victim of selective prosecution or mistrial, then his pardon sent a very wrong message. And I think that's a concern of many Malaysians. It's simple common sense.
Chin Huat, can I ask you, how would you respond to those who say, well, why not pardon Najib? Anwar Ibrahim also received a royal pardon.
We go back to that questions here, that Anwar Ibrahim case, he has served a substantive part of his jail term. he has not, there were elements of mistrial in his case. In this case, in the case of Najib Razak, we have not seen credible argument of mistrial. So this is really where the situation
lies. Is if he gets pardoned, even just a partial pardon, because he has shown remorse and willingness to undertake actions of redemption, that's acceptable. But what has happened? And more so, normally, if you have corruption convicts seeking for pardon,
the simplest thing is for them to return all the ill-gotten wealth. But in this case, he actually got his fine reduced by 160 million ringgit. Now, how big is that number? If you are talking about a house costing 200,000, we are looking at 800 houses here. If you are talking about funding students to undertake a degree course costing 30,000, we are looking at more than 5,000 students.
So, Chin Huat, I'm just going to reference the Project Summer statement that you put out. And in here you say it's not unusual for pardons to be given to convicted politicians, but this is usually to affect political reconciliation. So, talk me through what you see as the impact or implications for the political landscape. How might this impact the Madani government?
In Korea, they have sent 4 ex-presidents to jail. All 4 were pardoned. All of them apologized. And 3 of them were pardoned at the directions or suggestions of a president from another party. Over here, people would not see that as political reconciliation. First of all, if Najib insists that he's a victim of selective prosecutions or mistrial, so that would be a slap on both the prosecution and the judiciary. And people would ask only a simple question, putting aside the process and procedure, people would only ask the questions. Could this possibly happen if Dr. Mahathir is the Prime Minister?
Chin Huat, thank you so much for joining me. That was Professor Wong Chin Huat, political scientist. There, we're going to take a quick break here on Consider This. We will be back with more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. We're continuing our discussion about the implications of the conditional pardon that was granted to former Prime Minister Najib Razak. His sentence has been reduced from 12 years to 6 years. His fine reduced from 210 million ringgit to 50 million ringgit. Joining us now on the line is lawyer Sin Yew. Sin Yew, thank you for being on the show with me today. From a legal perspective, how are you reading this halving of jail time and the huge reduction in fines?
It's perfectly legal, if that's what the question is. Article 42 of the Constitution allows the Yang di-Pertuan Agong to exercise the power not just to pardon, but to reduce, in legal terms, we call it remit the sentence from 12 years to 6 years, as well as the fine. So it's perfectly constitutional, but I suppose that's not where the controversy is. It's not so much whether it's legal or not legal. It's more of, I think, the circumstances surrounding the case and the exercise of such powers.
Right. Is there anything about this pardon that stands out to you, Sin Yew?
Well, it's not the first time this has happened. So in some ways, I suppose it doesn't stand out, because in the past, this has been exercised before. And if you're thinking I'm referring to PMX, I'm not in the past, I think in the 80s as well, in the 90s. In the 80s, we had the case of Haji Harun Idris, the ex-chief minister. I think it was for Selangor. So he received a full pardon after serving 3.5 years in prison from the original 6 years of sentence. And then we have the case of Mokhtar Hashim. He was sentenced to the death penalty for murder. So he received a change of a sentence from a death penalty to 12 years. So politicians receiving pardon, I might sound desensitized, but it's not the first time this has happened.
Right. Well, what do you understand, Sin Yew, to be the factors which the Pardons Board takes into consideration when making a recommendation for either a full pardon or a conditional pardon? I'm just wondering, I mean, does the convict need to show remorse, to show that he, is a changed person? Does he need to admit guilt? What are the considerations based on your understanding?
Here's the thing about the Pardons Board. It's something that is separate from the judicial process. So whilst the judicial process requires certain factors to be taken into account, and that those factors, for example, remorse, his contribution to society, all those have been set out by many precedents for many years. But when it comes to a Pardons Board, it's not the judicial process anymore. You're talking about the prerogative of mercy. You're talking about a purely executive act where you're not limited by judicial factors. Although some, I suspect, might overlap, like, for example, remorse and all that. But that process, it's something that they are not confined by what's there in the law. They can look at other things. As to what exactly they look at, I'm not entirely sure. And that's something that I suppose for the public to understand this process better, maybe more communications needs to be done as to what factors they look in. But the power is unlimited, and the power, by the power I mean the power to look into things. It's not restricted. So yeah.
So are you saying that the recommendations of the Pardons Board, or even the grounds under which Najib made the application for the pardon, and of course the entire process, are you saying that that's not necessarily made transparent? That doesn't have to be made public?
There's very little that is known about the pardons process, and I suspect that has always been the practice. It's not like a court process where everything is public. The pardons process is not a public hearing, and it of course, part of what you hear, the outrage that you hear and the controversy that you hear in the public discourse, that's, I suspect, motivated by the lack of understanding of the pardons process. But overall, it is not a court hearing, so you can't really equate the two. But that being said, it is part of government. It is part of executive. So we would expect, the basic principles of what constitutes good governance, transparency, and all that, accountability, and all that too should be practiced.
Okay, all right. So what we understand is that Najib is to be released from prison. I think it's August 2028, and that's not taking into account early release for good behavior. Sin Yew, maybe walk us through it. How does good behavior work? How does that translate into a commuted sentence?
So all prisoners, they are entitled to a remission under the law. That's in the Prisons Act, and that's normally 1/3 of the time of the total sentence. So in 12 months, you normally serve only 8 months, and here 6 years, you would serve only 4 years. So I think he was in prison. First day in prison was 23rd of August 2022. So it should be out by 23rd of August 2026. But that being said, there are still other cases that are ongoing. So yes, the date might be 23rd August 2026, but assuming that he is found guilty and sentenced before that, then he may not be out, I suspect.
Right. So you've said earlier that the pardons process is completely separate from the judicial process. But how might this pardon, this conditional pardon, affect his other ongoing cases? Would it affect?
I don't. It won't affect. Legally, it has no bearing on his other cases. His other cases needs to go on and go through the legal process. But what would happen, and this is projecting ourselves, far ahead in the future, assuming that he is found guilty and he is convicted and he is sentenced. During the sentencing process, they need to take into account his time spent in prison, if he is still in prison, and then for the sentence to perhaps run from the date of his release. So even though his release date is set at 23rd August 2028, without taking into account good behavior, that could be extended, assuming that the judge sentences him for any new offences before the date of his release. So it's not certain yet whether he will be released on that date. But of course, presumption of innocence, it's no certainty that he will be found guilty. So for now, I think we can take it as a fact that he will be released on the 23rd of August with good behavior, 2026. No good behavior, 2028.
Sin Yew, thank you so much for talking to me. That was Lawyer New Sin Yew. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. The Pardons Board has announced its decision to reduce Najib Razak's jail term from 12 to 6 years, as well as his fine from 210 million ringgit to 50 million ringgit. Now let's speak to Arinah Najwa Ahmad Said, who is a director at the political risk consultancy Bauer Group Asia. Arinah, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. What are your concerns surrounding this conditional pardon that's been granted to the former Prime Minister Najib Razak?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I think firstly, when we look at, let's look at it from the public perspective. I think the question is how much of a regard was the judiciary's decision to uphold their decision in the first place. So I think a lot of people are now bringing back the issue of antara dua darjat when it comes to, reduction of crime, punishment of a crime this scale versus in other circumstances where for more menial crimes, but you have harsher punishments. So I think there's that public perception where it's slightly, demotivated. I think there's a lot of question with regards to how do our institutions work when we already have our trust in the judiciary and it was done in the right due process. However, there's a sort of overriding decision that can counter that. Of course, I think that will be a different view if you look at the Najib supporters, right? They feel that they are, somewhat vindicated. I think, his daughter Noriana recently just posted saying that she was disappointed actually in the decision because it still meant that there was some guilt. So I think overall, if you look at the public perception, it's still a lot of question with regards to how was this decided by the Pardons Board? How was it allowed? And how did the king himself at the time even allow for such a decision to happen?
How do you see this impacting the Madani government then, Arinah? I mean, particularly because the Madani government has, campaigned on a platform of anti-corruption. How do you think the public will view this?
Yeah, For sure. I think definitely the Madani government had, received a lot of criticism very early on, even entering into government, that euphoria has kind of stagnated a little bit when we saw the Deputy Prime Minister have his charges amounting to a non-acquittal, the DNAA. I think there was a lot of question with regards to that. And now as well, granted, you can say that it was the Pardon Board's decision, but there were representatives from this government within the Pardon Board as well. So I think that does bring more question with regard to the commitment that the government has to reform. Having said that, the government did announce, a slew of new policies in trying to better Malaysia. We have things like the NETR, NIMP. So I think this year will be a critical year for this government in executing those policies, especially when you look at the establishment of, institutions, organizations like Pantau Madani, for example. So I think if they want to have that redeeming quality, I think those policy executions need to be done quite swiftly and quite in a committed manner to kind of say that, look, we have these issues of realpolitik, whatever they want to argue. However, we are committed to making Malaysia, a more prosperous country.
Well, you mentioned Najib supporters might be happy at this news. I'm just wondering how this would impact UMNO internally as a party, a component party of the Madani government. But also, do you see Najib having a political future still in the party?
Well, that would be interesting because I think definitely the political dynamic within UMNO would be affected. Of course, I think we previously talked about how the lawyers said he could be out a lot earlier if he was on good behavior ahead of elections. So I think with regards to UMNO, they're quite divided from what we understand. So it's not as clear as pro-Najib. And some are quite unhappy with Zahid, given his decision to kind of not have any not allow a more democratic election for the president role. However, then does that mean that there could be a new person coming into the party then to run for president, for example? Najib has been committed in wanting to return to politics. I think his team has been quite active. His daughter has been quite active. So we feel that, at least I see that he will definitely try to make a comeback, but it will definitely be dependent on the different variables within the party dynamics in terms of challenging the presidency, who are the next candidates that are going to run, and how much support by that time in 2028, 2027, depending on the good behavior, whether or not the dynamics within UMNO has shifted, because they need to kind of galvanize and remain relevant as well until then, right? So hopefully there definitely will be some changes, and that'll be an interesting thing to see from UMNO.
Do you still get a sense that he has ground support?
Interestingly, yes, he does. He does have the ground support, and he does. From what we can see, also at least some kind of financial standing, as well. Not just from him, also maybe his wife and the family as well, because the family is still also involved in politics. They also campaign. They also are involved in the political party. So definitely, there is some level of support. But I think it's just, biding time. Like by the time, this comes, will that support maintain? Will it shift? So I think maybe, if anyone within the party is interested to run for their presidency, they should probably start now. Start now and work on it now.
All right. Well, Arinah, I'm already seeing this news picked up by international organizations. We're seeing headlines internationally. How do you think this impacts Malaysia's international standing, investor perception and confidence in the country, and essentially, anti-corruption and the rule of law here? What are your thoughts?
I think it will definitely impact the perception. Like I said, it goes back to how much of a regard our country holds with regards to the judiciary and its decision. Having said that, I don't think it will be so immediate, because the government did have all these plans lined up, and there are investors who are keen and they do want to come into Malaysia. So I think probably they will look at that first, and then they will see whether or not what can be done. However, in the longer term, I think it will definitely have a negative impact on Malaysia, because, when you look at businesses, they care about visibility and stability. And if they feel that, this is a country where even the judiciary can be overridden to a certain extent on major cases such as this, what does that mean then for our business? So it could have that longer term impact. Then Malaysia could be, deemed as, maybe slightly less attractive when it comes to its commitment to things like transparency, governance, those kinds of elements. But I wouldn't see any immediate impact at the moment.
Right. That was Arinah Najwa Ahmad Said wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris signing off the evening. Thank you so much for watching and good night.